Welcome to Bible Roundtable. My name's Brooks Boyd. I'm the moderator for this program. And today I have two good, sound, faithful gospel preachers with me to help me find answers to some of the issues of life and some of the things that we face in our daily lives. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves, not because I don't know them, but because I want them to tell you what they feel is important about themselves. Brother Bobby.
I'm Bobby Gayton. I'm the preacher at the Carsville Church of Christ, and I've been there for 21 years. I'm married, I have 3 children and 6 grandchildren.
Wow, okay. Well, you got me beat there.
5 girls and 1 boy.
Okay, awesome, good. Robbie?
Well, I know it's going to be a bragging session. I'm Robbie Eversole. I'm the minister for the Pennville Church of Christ. Been there for 13 years.
Wow.
And married, have 2 children, grown, and 2 granddaughters. So, glad to be here.
All right, so we're all in the Grandpa Club. That's
Grandpa
great.
Club.
That's great. All right. Well, we've got an issue that actually you may have dealt with this. I have. Christians who are concerned about the moral decline of our government because our government uses some of our tax dollars to fund things that we don't just believe are wrong, we know they're wrong. There are some Christians who think it would be justifiable not to pay their taxes. So, Robbie, what do you think about that?
Well, I'll fight for anything that would help curtail evil things. But as a citizen of the United States, as a subject to the government in which the country in which I live, I am Bible bound to honor the laws of the land. And the laws of the land say that you work, you pay taxes.
Okay.
So Romans 13, beginning in verse 1, says, "Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God." And then he talks about resisting the power, and but the powers that be are ordained of God. Even evil governments. I think back a few years ago, Saddam Hussein was a very ruthless, evil ruler, and yet the citizens of that government, that office, though it was abused, that office was is an office that God ordained. And he never ordained Saddam Hussein abusing that, but the office itself is a God-ordained position. And we're to have respect and reverence for that because it is a God-ordained. There is no power but of God. So, yes, a Christian renders to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and to God the things that are God's.
Okay.
And,
All right. Bobby, both of you guys have some background in serving the government.
Verse 7 of Romans 13. And he says, "Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor." And so, it's like Robbie says, that it is ordained of God, and therefore we are God-bound, or we have authority from God that we do that. Even though we disagree with how funds are used, and so we must, but we still have to pay the taxes. Even though there are those who are, now my understanding is there are some people that I've heard on the news that are threatening that they're not going to pay them. Well, then our tax money will help take care of them because they're supposed to pay tax. And so I really think that, that it's a thing that we as Christians should point out to, as preachers, that we should point out to our congregation that we do have a responsibility toward our government.
Yes. Very good.
Just to add to that, I don't think there was perhaps a more godless government ever in society than Rome.
Right.
And Jesus paid taxes.
Right.
And so I think that it behooves us to, even though we may not agree, we're not going to be held responsible for how the government spends the money. If they spend it on abortion or homosexuality, I'm not held accountable for how the funds are spent. But I'm going to be held accountable for whether or not I rebelled against those in authority over me.
Okay. The great thing about our country, and you said you haven't traveled that much, but visit any other country, the freedoms that we have here to have an impact on our government, to speak up and to say, this is not right. Yes, abortion is funded now by the decree of the president. Abortion is now funded
Right.
by our tax dollars. It was intermingled with organizations that were providing it at one time, but now, yes, they will be funded.
It will be funded
by
through the health
by our
care
tax
bill.
dollars. But stand up and speak up, right?
That's right.
We don't have to be silent just because we are citizens of this country. We do have to be law-abiding. We do have to live under the authority of those powers that are ordained of God. All right. Well, good answer. Anything else that you feel is pertinent to that?
Jesus left us an example that we should follow in his steps, and so he paid taxes, and that's the only thing I happen to think of there.
Okay.
To follow his example, we will too.
Very good. All right. Well, the next thought, Jesus said, "By this shall all men know that you're my disciples, if you have love one for another." John chapter 13, verse 35. Well, based on Jesus making that affirmation, is it always wrong for a local congregation to split? And why would you say that, Brother Bobby?
Well, when I read that question, I've mentioned Acts 15. There was a serious problem among the church back in Acts chapter 15. Serious problem where Jewish Christians were trying to bind circumcision and trying to bind some of their Jewish feast days and other parts of the Old Testament law. Then on the other hand, you had the Gentiles who were fornicators. That's, it wasn't anything wrong to have sexual relationships outside of marriage, and they had come out of all that. And then plus the eating of blood, the saying strangled, and eating meat's been offered to idols. And so you had those two different groups of people, and they came and they became members of the church. And the question there in my mind, the things in my mind is that here they were, even though they had differences, they came together and worked out the differences. Mm-hmm. Now, did the letter that James writes solve the problem in the brotherhood? No. Because again, you still had those two cultures fighting among themselves, and I'm not really saying physically fighting, but they wanted to have it their way and so on, right. And they continue to have that problem. But the letter that was written by James was still the standard. That you don't bind upon the Gentiles these things, and don't you do these things among that of the Jewish people. Those things were still binding, and they dealt with that over and over again throughout some of the epistles. And even the church at Corinth, of all the problems that they had, and Paul writes to them, there's a vision there, and he says, look, you're to be of the same mind and the same judgment. Can you imagine that? Of that group of people, he said, you be of the same mind and same judgment. And we're to be the very same way. I would hate to stand before my God and be responsible for splitting the church. That's the Lord's body. And so we need to be able to work things out, and we can work things out if we go back to what the Bible says. It produces fellowship, and that's what John talks about in 1 John chapter 1.
All right. Rob, is there ever an occasion where it would be the thing to do?
I think so. I think there's occasions where congregations are benefited because of. Now, let me preface this by saying this. All division isn't sinful, but whatever it is that led to the division is sinful. Okay. Because God hates those who sow discord among the brethren. Yeah. Proverbs 6. By this shall all men know that you're my disciples, if you have love one for another. I'm going to go out on a limb here and make a statement, and I hope it's a good statement. I believe that we can love people too much.
Okay.
I think when we love people more than we love this book.
That's right. That's right.
We can love people too much. If someone is teaching error and you've gone to them, you've done the due diligence, you've begged, you've pleaded, and sometimes division is the only thing to withdraw yourself from that particular congregation or excise them from it, whatever that you can do. There's a principle in James 3 where James talks about wisdom. He said it must first be pure, then it can be peaceable. Verse 17. Now I know his subject is wisdom, but the same thing can be said about truth. It must first be pure before it can be peaceable. And error will split a church. Mm-hmm. And now the error is sin. But good brethren who want to stand for the truth and keep the church pure. You mentioned standing before God, having divided the body. I agree with that, by the way, 100%. I had rather be the soldier who took the spear and pierced his physical, literal side than to be the preacher today who pierces and divides asunder his spiritual body.
Right.
He viewed the spiritual body of far more worth than his physical body. He gave his physical body to purchase the spiritual body of the church. So it must first be pure, then we can have peace. Where there is no purity of doctrine, there can be no peace.
Right.
I hope I haven't shocked you by saying that we can. I just think that when we put people and personalities above the truth,
Right.
and when we side with somebody because they're our best friend, no matter what they teach, then we've loved them too much.
Right.
Amen. We are living in a time, and we're not the first ones to have this experience, but we're living in a time when there is a weakening of conviction that this book is the only standard,
Yeah.
that this is the pattern. In fact, people are laughing at the idea in some groups now that there is a pattern at all for the church. But we're living in a time where there is a weakening of the foundation. David wrote about if the foundations be moved, then what will the righteous do? Well, we'll have to go where we can put the foundations back down. So I've seen the things that would contribute to problems, not just that someone is coming in and all of a sudden they've got this new doctrine and they're going to have their way or whatever, but you see it gradually creeping in, progressing, what we call it, incrementalism. You've seen some of that, Brother Bobby? You know what I'm talking about?
Right. Small things that led to big things.
Yeah.
But now I said what I said. Then the question I think was, should it split? Is it wrong? And I don't believe it's wrong. I just simply want to make the point I would not want to be, and to split the church. I would not want to be that person. Because of the judgment that they're going to have to face. But there are going to come. I think when we read about the 7 churches of Asia, we see that. There are those that held on and held on and held on until it's time for them to leave because the church wouldn't stand for truth anymore. And so we're going to have people that are not going to stand for what's right. And people are going to say, well, we're going to do what the Bible says, therefore we're going to leave. I preached for a congregation that did that in the denominational world. They came to know truth. And that truth led them to eventually become the church. And I was their first located preacher. And it was there's some things that didn't have right, but we eventually got those things right. But they wanted to do what was right. And so that's the same way with us. And so, there are going to be times. And Robbie made a point, sometimes it's good because you got a congregation that's not doing anything, and all of a sudden you have a group of people that leave, and next thing you know, they're bigger than the congregation they left. And the reason for it is because the spirit of evangelism that they have, the spirit and the love that they have one for another, and especially the spirit that they have for truth.
Zealous for truth.
Our love for our brothers and sisters ought to drive us to make sure that they're right religiously, right spiritually, even if it demands tough love.
Right.
We need to not put our friendships above doing what's right for that soul. I had a fellow ask me one time, said, Preacher Rob said, if the Church of Christ is right, why are you so small? And when you look at the population of the world and the population, we're minuscule, less than 1% of the world. I mean, we are microscopic. And my answer to him was, truth has never been popular. Right. When Adam and Eve was on the earth, only 2 people, they both sold the truth. It's never been popular. And the same thing in our congregations. Truth, it becomes unpopular because you're raising kids in the real world and they want to do things. So our preacher better not preach against whether it be cheerleading or dancing or social drinking or, on and on and on those issues could go. And I'm not trying to dredge up those issues, but preachers, I would hate to be the preacher who caused the church to divide, but I would also hate to be the preacher who failed to stand for the truth, even if it caused division. Truth never causes division. Error always does.
That's it.
But I would hate to be the preacher who failed to stand for what was right, even though the church would divide.
And I guess that would be the primary distinction here. And even if there's a situation where there's error that has crept in, we're going to do our diligence to win them back, to resolve that issue, to show that it is erroneous, that it is false doctrine, and that a Christian has no business accepting it and following it.
That's right.
And keep the church together. If it's a matter of judgment, then there should never be a division.
Never.
Personality. I've often said, if by my leaving I could keep the church together as a preacher, I should not stay and have my way.
No.
There are going to be some people whispering in your, oh, we want you, and when you sense that that's the case, that there's going to be some tension in the church based on this personality. If it's me, then I'm looking for somewhere to go.
And even in the area of Christian liberty where you have rights, if that right is going to cause a division in the church, then I think we need to surrender that right.
Yeah.
Don't you? As long as we're not compromising doctrine, I'm not saying that.
As long as
I believe that's what Paul went on to do about the meats.
Yeah, 1 Corinthians 8,
To give you an example, I know of a gentleman who is an elder in the Lord's church, and some of the members think that he should not be an elder, but he won't step down, and it's caused division. He should have just stepped down.
Yeah.
And that would have saved and spared the congregation from the problems.
Amen. Amen. Yeah. We need to see the bigger picture, and we need to see something bigger than ourselves.
Right.
And that's what the kingdom should be in a sense. All right. I appreciate your input, and I know we weren't attributing anything less to you, brother.
I understand that.
Anything other than that. But appreciate your honesty and your openness, and sad to see, but sometimes we do have that situation arise in the church, and someone standing aside may say, well, that can't be right because they split away. Well, unless you know that it wasn't a matter of biblical principle, you shouldn't be making that judgment.
Right.
All of Israel was God's people, but Moses said, who is on the Lord's side, let him come over here and stand.
Yeah.
And 3,000 of them did.
Yeah. And put on their swords, I think.
Put on their, and killed.
Yeah. So
3,000, I think, fell that day, didn't they?
I think so.
more than that, but you bring up these spur of the moment things, and I'm not ready for that.
About it.
Well, my mind never. You just don't want to know what's up in there.
Hey, I'm the same way. But another subject here, personal subject, and you don't have to reveal all your secrets, but motivation can make the difference in whether you can sit down and say, I've done what I believe I should have done today, or questioning, have I done what I should have done. Motivation can cause you to see yourself as a success in what you do or a failure in what you do, the lack of motivation. So, Robbie, as a preacher, what do you do to stay motivated?
Well, Sundays come real quick.
Amen.
If you wait till Monday to get started on Sunday, you're already behind, or I am at least. So I try to stay ahead in that area. My motivating factor is Calvary. I read a lot about Calvary. I love the story of the cross, and I love to read about Calvary, and I love to meditate about Calvary. That is my biggest motivating factor. And then I have grandchildren, and I just want to fight to keep the church pure, so that at least there will be one congregation where they'll have an opportunity to come to and go to heaven from. And if we don't, then what's our grandkids going to do? Where are they going to go and worship and get from here to heaven? So that's a great motivation for me. At the end of the day, as I reflect, sometimes I think, boy, I failed God today. I let God down today. And many times I do fail Him. Many times I do let Him down. But I like to study every day. I like to just read my Bible or read books about the Bible. I've got 3 books that I'm reading right now. I'll read little bit and put one down, get another and read a little bit and put it down. But I'm reading a book by Wayne Jackson and reading a book by Kyle Butt and reading one by, well, the name escapes me right now, but it's a good one.
Okay, great.
Brad Harram.
Okay.
Brad
all right,
Harram.
Yeah.
And authors that I can highly recommend to the GBN audience.
Okay.
Anyway, those are some of the things that motivate me. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you were looking for
Sure.
or not, but
The answer won't be the same for any of us.
Right.
Bobby, what do you do?
Well, I concur. Truly, all of us, we have that goal of going to heaven. You know, God told us that I'll never leave you, I'll never forsake you. That's the promise He's made to us. And then also, like Paul writes, you know, we're pressed toward. And so in doing that, though, still we're going to have our ups and downs. I have a sheet of paper on the window in my office so the people can see. And it says, choose the work. I wrote it down to make sure I wouldn't forget. Choose the work that you love, and you'll never have to work a day in your life. I love what I do.
amen.
I just, I mean, it's, I've worked secular jobs and preached at the same time, but I love my work. I love the study of the Bible. I love the people that I meet. I love studying with people. And I don't look at it as work. Now, I get myself in trouble, like if you invited me to preach and I'd probably make a comment, they said, well, about working. I said, well, I don't really work, you know, because I love what I do, you know, and I don't call it work.
Yeah.
And but I have that saying, and a lot of the people see that, and they say, well, you know, Bobby doesn't work, but I do work. I am actually a workaholic, and my family would tell you that, and I guess my elders will tell you that. But I just love what I do. I love working for the Lord, and I really love studying the Bible. It's just, and I love studying with people. It just really amazes me when you study with people and
yeah.
see them change. Them right before your eyes.
Amen.
Before your eyes, when you see them, like we were talking about earlier about the fellow said that he saw right quick that he had to be baptized because his baptism wasn't correct to what he had learned from the Bible, and you know, it's just amazing.
Sure.
Best retirement plan out there.
That's right. That's the other thing.
Retirement
The best
plan is out of
retirement
this world.
plan.
It's out of this world.
Out of
It
this
is.
world. Yeah.
I've heard you, Robbie. One time I heard you preach, and you said that having Bible studies with people, individuals, one-on-one, you said that's my bread and butter.
I love it. I love it. That's all evangelism is one beggar telling another beggar where to find bread. That's all
great.
it is. And I love to get around that kitchen table and just open up the book and just lead someone gently. Just lead them. And what a reward it is when you see the light come on.
Yes.
When you see the face light up and the eyes light up, and you know they grasp that soul-saving truth. It's not far from there to the baptistry, brother.
Amen.
Yeah. You see, I ask people about the cross, and you know, if it was just me and you, Jesus would still have died.
Right.
And you see the eyes starting to tear up. You know you've got somebody that's getting it, that understands it's for them.
It's for them.
And that
You know, Paul
this
went
makes
all over the
difference.
known world telling everybody how Christ died for them. And at the conclusion of his life, he said, he gave himself for me. He personalized it.
Right.
When he come to the end of his life, he said, Christ died for me. And he had gone all over telling everybody else how Christ died for them. We need to personalize it ourselves and say, Christ died for me. If I'd have been the only one to have ever lived,
He was still.
he'd have still made that trek up Heartbreak Hill. Sure would have.
There's a phrase that I learned when I was in Vietnam. My platoon sergeant was killed, and he had talked to us two or 3 days before that. He was going to another platoon, and he had been to visit his wife in Hawaii. And he told us, he says, you only have one life, and life is what you make it. And so the life is what you make it, and my life as a Christian is what I make it. Because we know if I read and study the Bible, it's going to be like God wants it to be. And so our life is what we make out of it. And I think all members of the church need to realize that life is what you make it.
And you know,
I'm not going to control your life. You can allow other people to control your life, but life is what you make.
it is. We decide to be happy. But you know,
That's right.
I have, in my own personal life, I've noticed that I've got a lot more patience with somebody coming out of error toward the truth than I do with somebody leaving the truth and going back into error. I'm a lot more patient. And it takes patience as we get around the kitchen table. I've studied with people sometimes for a year. I mean religiously, week after week after week for a year before their conversion. It reminds me of the little boy who went to kindergarten, and he went back home after the first day of kindergarten, and Mama said, "Well, did you learn anything?" He said, "I must not have. I got to go back tomorrow." And that's the way evangelism is. Sometimes you just go back and go back and go back, and it requires a lot of patience. But we're just bread seekers and helping some other hungry soul find the bread. That's all we're doing.
You've got to stay fed, and that's
Absolutely.
I don't know anybody that's a preacher that doesn't study. I've heard of some. Don't know any of those guys personally, but for me personally, I've got to have my, I guess you could call it upper room time. I've got to be me and the Lord and listening to what He has to say to me. You know, there's some books that have come out of that. Go ye means go me, Ivan Stewart wrote. And a friend of mine, gospel preacher now deceased, wrote a book, How Galatians Means Me. Well, that's what I'm looking for, you know. And I guess my motivation is just digging as deep as I can. You know, both of you guys have degrees, you've advanced degrees. You know,
I'm 98.6. How about you? You know,
you've done some extra study, but it's not just so, hey, I can put that on my resume, is it? Isn't it for you personally?
I never tell anybody about it, actually.
Right. I know that. That's why I brought it up.
You know, if we don't study and do like what you're talking about, especially as preachers, the congregation will soon catch up with us.
That's right.
And one of the great challenges, as you know, of preaching is saying the same thing every Sunday, but saying it a different way. Baptism always has to be for remission of sins. The church always has to be one and unified. And, you know, we've got to reach the same conclusion every lesson, but you've got to couch it in a different way. And if you don't study, you're not going to be able to do that for long. Not for long, you're not. The well will run dry, won't it?
They call it running out of soap. Right?
Yes, you will run out of soap. You sure will.
Well, speaking of running out of soap, we're about to run out of time. But I do appreciate what you brethren not only have done today, but the fact that I could call upon you without any mental reservation about, I wonder what they're going to say, or I hope they don't mess up, you know, as far as answering these questions. Could have confidence because I know you're faithful brethren. And I appreciate it.
And we know that about you. And we love and thank you for your dedication.
Well,
Appreciate the work you do.
Yes, sir.
I'm nothing, but certainly I'm thankful that we have this opportunity together to talk about God's Word. And everybody needs to know this book can answer all the issues.
Every one of them.
Thank you, brethren, and everyone listening, you have a better day. Thank you much.